Putin rapidly runs out of single-use soldiers, and approximately 70% of Russians are already ready to give up. And to make things even worse for Putin, Ukrainians recently had an extremely successful raid in the brand new location in the Black Sea. But more about all this in just a couple of minutes. What's up, investors? It's the Russian dude. And today, let's briefly talk about the Western military support Ukraine before we switch our attention to the east and the south of the country. And first of all, according to some Western military experts, Ukrainian pilots will most likely start using F-16 fighter jets already this winter, as early as in February 2024. In addition to that, Germany will be providing 40 more infantry fighting vehicles called Marder to Ukraine, bringing the total numbers of these vehicles to 80. And just in general, NATO will be performing the biggest military training since the beginning of the Cold War, which will be mainly held on the territory of Germany, Poland and Baltic states, and it will employ at least 41,000 soldiers. It is estimated that 32 different countries will participate in this training, and the main topic will be how to deter the potential aggression from Russia. Congratulations, Mr. Putin, with your plans of not letting NATO expand. You just played yourself. But hold on. We will talk right now about the east of Ukraine, but first of all, what is the response by Russians? So if you remember from last week, in order for them to protect their own military planes, they were putting the car tires on top of their planes. Well, now they came up with another ridiculous solution. And as you can see from this picture, they installed these nets over the planes, protecting from potential drones and maybe even missiles. And just overall, it does not look very secure, to be honest, because drone can just fly in front of these nets, not on top of it. But I mean, what do I know? Let me know in the comments. And if you also think that most likely, to say the least, it is not going to work, can you please like this video and subscribe to my channel to see how many of us are right here on the same page. You can also follow me on Instagram to see how I live outside of YouTube. The link is down below. And so yes, now let's talk about the situation in the east of Ukraine, which led to Putin rapidly running out of a single-use, as he calls them, soldiers. But first of all, we just have to make a stop in the capital of Russia, Moscow, and in one of its regions, Podolsk. As you can see, there was a pretty big fire, and according to the locals, cars which were suspiciously next to the police station self-ignited. But okay, enough of Russia, now let's go back to Ukraine. And so first of all, according to Ukrainians fighting in the front lines, they were able to destroy a Russian assault group along with their military vehicles located to the north of Sinkivka next to Liman Pershey. Then we refer to the report by the Institute for the Study of War, which claims that Russians and Ukrainians continued their combat activities along Kupiansk-Svatove-Kreminna front line. And next to Svatove, Ukrainians, once again using only a drone, were able to destroy a self-propelled mortar of Russians called Tulpan. Moving down to Kreminna, according to Ukrainians, they were able to destroy an artillery firing position of Russians along with their two artillery pieces located in Chervona Popivka. And then, as we move closer to the border of Donetsk region, Ukrainians were also able to destroy an abandoned Russian armored personnel carrier called BMP-1. Our next stop brings us to Bakhmut, where fights continue pretty much every single day, but Ukrainians were able to perform yet another successful raid, eliminating a dozen of Russian soldiers, wounding several of them, and even capturing some of them for the prisoners of war exchange later. And in confirmation of this, they share with us this almost 5 minutes video, which highlights the main events of this raid. You can see the full video, the link is down below. And just in general, according to the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, a total of 49 square kilometers of territory around Bakhmut has already been liberated. And as we take a look at this map, we can see that indeed Ukrainians were able to push Russian defenses even further down to the east. Another major liberation happened recently next to Opotne, located to the south of Avdiivka, and as of right now it is estimated that Ukrainians have a control over the main parts of this city, and it is only less than 2 kilometers away from Donetsk airport. And one of the main recent so-called innovations of the Ukrainian army is that they're using the anti-tank mines TM62, attaching half of an empty plastic bottle and drop it on the position of Russian occupiers, almost like darts. And I think that at this point it is pretty obvious that the losses of the Russian army, specifically in the east, are truly colossal, and Russians are just struggling so much to keep the cities and the territories under the control, which they already have. There is not a single major advancement by the Russian army which happened in the last several weeks. Once again, they just struggle to be as is. Putin and the Ministry of Defense of Russia, Sergei Shoigu, they just thought that they can use the prehistoric Soviet tactics when they can win the war with the number of soldiers, but as of right now, as you can see, Putin is already rapidly running out of them single-use soldiers. And at this rate, inevitably, Russian defenses sooner or later will be breached, and the Russian soldiers, the remaining ones, they will simply panic and start running away, not listening to any order of their military commandment, because at that point it will be every man for himself. And unless Putin does something else, something like another mobilization, most likely Russians will start losing their positions in the east very soon. But at the same time, announcing another mobilization by Putin will most certainly decrease his trust, confidence and rating among regular Russians, which is also the very last thing he wants to do. So let's see which decision from this lose-lose situation he will take. It will be pretty interesting. But for now, there are way more pressing concerns to Russian army in the south of Ukraine, so let's talk about this right now, and then talk about Ukrainians establishing a dominance in the Black Sea. And first of all, let's make a quick stop in Simferopol, located on the temporarily occupied Crimea, where the local military base of Russians again spontaneously got caught on fire. Then let's go to Zaporozhye region, and if you remember, last week this is where Russians were holding preliminary elections, which will obviously be never recognized by anyone except Russians. And so Ukrainians, in order to try to disrupt them, they were sending some of their drones to these occupied police stations and other government quote-unquote buildings with Russian infiltrators. And speaking about the drones, Ukrainians themselves, they were able to intercept every single one out of 12 Russian Shahid drones last day. Then we have another extremely interesting video, which shows us the actual combat footage between 3 tanks. One is Ukrainian Leopard 2 tank versus 2 Russian tanks. And as a result of this combat action, Ukrainians were able to severely damage both Russian tanks and they had to retreat. Then we once again refer to the report by the Institute for the Study of War, which claims that the main success of Ukrainians came from the western Zaporozhye region, and then in between Zaporozhye and Donetsk regions. And indeed, as we take a look at this map, we can see that Ukrainians were able to advance a little bit closer to Novoprokopivka, located to the south of Robotyne, and then as we go to Velika Novosilka front line, we can see that Ukrainians were also able to advance closer next to Staromayorsky and next to Novodonetsk and Novomayorsky, and also next to Pryutny the very next day. In addition to that, in Kherson front lines, Ukrainians were able to destroy a position of Russians, which were used to launch their Lancet drones, as you can see from this video. But the most important event of the last several days is that Ukrainians were able to re-establish the dominance in the Black Sea by recapturing so-called Boyka Towers. These Boyka Towers used to be the oil drilling stations which Russians occupied back all the way since 2015, and obviously they were using them for military purposes, because they provide them extremely close access to the temporarily occupied Crimea and the rest of southern Ukraine. And as you can see from this map, this is the approximate location of these 4 oil drilling stations, and as you can see, 2 of them are extremely close to Snake Island, which Ukrainians recaptured last year. So now you can see how important this small piece of land is. But the rest of them are located pretty deep inside the Black Sea, and reportedly Ukrainians were only using the rubber boats, which were later also discovered by the Russians and were under the attack, under the fire by Russian planes. But eventually they were able to recapture these stations and install their Ukrainian flags. And now, since Ukrainians will have the control over these oil drilling stations, they will definitely increase their dominance in the Black Sea area, because one of the captured pieces of equipment that Russians used to have is the radar, which basically allows Ukrainians to see the location of the Russian Black Sea fleet. And once again, talking about that original video, which is by the way 12 minutes action-packed combat footage, you will also be able to see Ukrainians rescuing one of their soldiers who allegedly spent 14 hours drifting in the sea. You'll be able to see Ukrainians fighting against Russian planes, obviously re-establishing the control over these drilling stations, and most importantly, capturing or stealing the Russian military equipment. And this video has much more action. It is definitely worth seeing, so if you want to see the full version, as always, it is on my Patreon. The link is down below. There is still 1 week of free access. And well, what do we have at this very moment? In the east, Putin is rapidly running out of single-use soldiers, and without another mobilization, the defenses will collapse. It is already happening in the south, with Ukrainians confidently breaching the first line of defenses of Russians, and now approaching the second and the third one. And now, moreover, in addition to that, Ukrainians re-established the dominance in the Black Sea. And if you remember, last week one of Russian helicopter pilot surrendered a Mi-8 plane to Ukrainians, switched sides, and basically got a financial compensation from the Ukrainian military. And well, reportedly, the rest of the Russian soldiers who are still fighting in Ukraine, and every single day realizing that this war is pretty much meaningless, it is only about the Putin's ego at this point, they also start to think about surrendering, because Ukrainians, as you can see, they promised the safety from Russians, some financial compensation, and this guy right now is experiencing all the benefits of voluntarily surrendering. And as of right now, if you also remember, Ukrainians have this I want to leave hotline where Russians can call and ask about how they can properly surrender. So since that incident with the Mi-8 helicopter, the number of requests by Russians increased by 70%. And so I don't know about you, but the future prospects of Putin continuing this war as it is, they do not look promising for him. And it just honestly feels like that the dominoes are already standing in their positions, and it only takes one unfortunate for Putin event to start one domino falling, and then it will cause a chain reaction of disasters for Putin regime. And I'm extremely curious what this one particular event is going to be, and if you are the same and you don't want to miss it, just please once again consider subscribing to my channel. It only takes one click. Thank you so much to all my Patreons, and see you tomorrow.